You're in the right place if you've been using ChatGPT and want to get more out of it but don't know how. Quick context, I lead AI implementation at a Series A startup in London, and I've worked with multiple businesses to implement AI into their systems. Most people use AI like a chatbot. They type in a prompt, they get an answer, and then they move on. But the top 1% use it completely differently. They use something called Codex. Codex is not just another chat window. It's one of the first mainstream examples of AI moving from answering questions to actually executing work. It can read your files, make changes, analyze data, create reports, build workflows, and connect with other tools. And top users turn Codex into a system that does parts of their job for them on a schedule across the tools that their business actually runs on. There are 5 levels to this, and 99% of people never get past level 1. I'm going to walk you through all 5 levels with the exact prompts using a fake but realistic business example. To get started with Codex, simply go to the sidebar of your ChatGPT app and then click on Codex, and then you'll be able to install the actual app here. Once it's installed, you can simply log into Codex and you'll get an interface that looks like this. Codex works by using the files that already live on your desktop. So as you can see here, I have a Codex demo folder here, which has the demo. The company is called Northstar, and it's a fictional B2B logistics company. And just like a real business, their data is messy. And the whole point of this demo is to show you how Codex can take a messy business folder like this and turn it into actual intelligence. Let me quickly break down how Codex works. So we start by giving it access to a folder by starting a new project. And I'm going to point it at the demo folder. And then Codex can read and make changes to the files in your folder. Once we have the project set up, we can start with level 1, which is using Codex to understand your work. At level 1, you're not asking Codex to build anything. You're simply asking it to look at your files, look at your folder, and explain what's going on. So the first prompt I'm going to use is, look through this folder and explain what is here. Tell me what each folder contains, what business questions we could answer using this information, what risks or anomalies you would investigate first, and which files seem the most important. This is a great level 1 prompt because I'm not asking Codex to act. I'm not asking it to do anything. I just wanted to understand the business context before it starts creating any outputs. And this is a really important habit because most people skip this. They give Codex a folder and then immediately ask it to generate something. But if you do that, you often get a shallow answer. Okay, so Codex noticed a few things here. It noticed the file structure and what the data was actually talking about. It gave me a list of questions that we can answer. And it flagged a few things that it could investigate. And as you can see, it quotes the files that it read through. And that's it. There's no build, there's no automation, no integrations. Inspect, summarize, explain. And this is where I start every project. Before I do anything with the data, I let Codex tell me what's in it. Most people stop here. They get a useful summary and then they move on. And that is also why people get stuck at level 1. Now, level 2 is where Codex starts doing actual work. In this example, the thing I want is an operations intelligence report. I don't want to manually open, 10 different CSVs and 3 different notes files. I just want to know what's changed, what's going on, where are we losing money. So the next prompt is, create a weekly operations intelligence report from the files in the inputs. Include the revenue and margin summary, the shipment performance, SLA risks, warehouse exceptions, customer escalations, finance and vendor anomalies, sales follow-up risks, and recommended actions. And then save the output in the outputs folder. So as you can see, I'm being very specific about the things that I want. And this is much better than just saying something like, analyze the business, right? That's too vague. Instead, I'm giving it a job. I'm treating Codex as if I would treat a sort of a junior employee who's just getting started with a company, because that's what Codex is. He doesn't have the context yet to actually do the job that I want it to do. So I tell it what output I want, I tell it where to save the result, and all of that increases the likelihood that I get the output that I actually need. Okay, there we go. And Codex has done some work and given us a report. And there we have it. as you can see, this is a detailed report that actually references real data, and it's given us tangible recommendations that we can actually use to make business decisions. And this is level 2, using Codex to create an output. But there's still a problem. If we do this once, it's useful. But Northstar needs this every week. And they don't want to manually ask Codex the same giant prompt every Monday. And that takes us to level 3. Now, level 3 is using Codex to create reusable workflows. The difference is massive because most people use AI to get one answer. But the real leverage comes when you can use AI to build the process that produces the answer again and again. So now that Codex has created the Northstar report, I can ask it, turn this analysis into a repeatable weekly workflow. Create workflow instructions, expected input files, output templates, review checklist, risk rules, and a process that can be reused next week. Save everything in workflows. And this is the point where Codex moves from being an assistant to a systems builder. Because now it's not just giving us a report, it's creating the operating process behind the report. Boom, there we go. Codex has created the workflow pack with a brief summary of what the workflow actually does and all the files that accompany it. Now, whenever I want the report again, I can tell Codex to run the weekly operations intelligence workflow, and it will do it based on the specifications that I already gave it. What's even better is if I have any feedback or anything I want to change, then Codex can just go in and change the workflow rather than having to start from scratch each time. Now, if I want to take this a step further, I can turn this into a skill. So, for example, if you have multiple clients and you know that you need to run a report of the same format for every client, then you might turn the report making into a skill. And you can do that by typing /skill and then skill creator. So let's go ahead and try that out. Now. Create a reusable skill for this weekly operations intelligence report. And as you can see, Codex is going to do the work to actually create the skill. Okay, so far we've gone through level 1, understanding, level 2, creating an output, and then level 3, turning it into a repeatable process. But there's still a limitation here. So far, Codex is mostly working with the files we manually put into this folder. And that is useful, but most businesses operate from multiple locations with multiple tools. And that takes us to level 4. Connecting Codex to the outside world. That is where something called MCPs and plugins come into play. So if we go into Codex and go to the left here, we can see the plugins sidebar. And as you can see, there are a bunch of plugins that Codex can use to connect to your system, right? So for example, I could connect to Slack, Gmail, Google Drive. If you're on the Microsoft system, you can connect to Teams or Calendar. Let's say, for example, that I use Fireflies, which is a meeting note taker. And I want to use the transcript and the summary from the call to inform my weekly reports. All I would have to do is install that particular plugin, give it the correct access, and then just install. Codex will automatically take you to login with whatever system you want to connect to. If you don't see the app that you want to connect, but you know that it has an MCP server, then you can go into settings and connect by using the MCP servers here. Simply click add server, and most likely you'll just need to add the server name and then the URL, and then you'll be able to add it as a custom MCP. If you have a custom connection that you want to build out, but there's no MCP and no other way to connect to it, this is the work that I do with GOM. So get in touch if that's the case. A good way to think about the connections that you actually need are take a look at what apps you use throughout the day as you're completing your work. It might be a finance system, an accounting system. It might be your CRM. It might just be email, right? Then look for connections that those systems have with your AI agent. So we went through levels 1 through 4. Now, level 5 is when Codex becomes a part of your actual operations. At level 5, you're going to set up a recurring workflow, which means that Codex can monitor, report, chat, and improve itself in a way that an employee might. And in order to do that, we're going to ask Codex for the automation prompt. Design a safe recurring automation for this weekly operations intelligence workflow. It should run every Monday morning. It should check the latest shipment, the warehouse, finance, customer, and sales data. It should create the weekly report. It needs to flag any anomalies and then draft any follow-up actions. Require human approval before sending any messages, disputing invoices, or creating external tasks. Save the automation design in automations. And as you can see, it's laid out a bunch of detail about what kind of outputs we need, where to get the information from, and then how to actually handle the human inputs. Okay, so now that I'm ready with the automation and I'm pretty happy with it, I can just take the file. I can copy it, and then go to the automations tab on the left here. And here I'll be able to just add a new automation and then boop, just add it in. Let's call this weekly automation report. And let's select it to run once a week on a Monday at 9 a.m. You can also select the model that you want it to use, as well as how hard you want it to think. I'll add it to the Northstar Codex demo project because that's the project folder where I want this automation to run, and then I'll create it. And as you can see, we now have the automation ready to run. We can just press run now to see what the demo output would be like. And you can see it's going to go through and basically create another chat window within the same project where it's going to go and execute the operation. One thing to note here is that you don't need to be watching this, but the computer needs to be open in order for Codex to complete the report. So I'd recommend creating the automation in a time when you know that you're going to be at work and your laptop's going to be open anyways. Okay, and we're back and we have the actual report, as well as a couple of action recommendations and a little log. So just to close the loop on this, we can go in and we can change this however we want. So just as an example, I could say, create a draft message using my Gmail connection and address it to manager@gmail.com. And as you can see, it's created the draft email report. And if I go into my actual Gmail, there you have it. There's the actual email and there's the report. So just to recap the 5 levels. Level 1 is understanding. Codex looks through the folder and the project and explains the business data. Level 2 is an output. We get Codex to create a weekly operations report. Level 3 is repeatability. Codex turns that report into a repeatable workflow or skill. Level 4 is the connections. So Codex decides which tools, MCPs, or external services should feed the workflow in production. And then finally, level 5 is the automation. So Codex designs the recurring system and then creates an output without us having to trigger it manually. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, where do I start? Don't start with the biggest, most complicated process. Let's try and look through your day and pick one annoying recurring task where you know the rules, you know what you have to do, but it just takes up time every single day. For Northstar, this was the weekly operations report. For your business, it might be a marketing report or a customer support summary. And then you ask yourself, okay, what are the inputs? What does the output need to look like? What rules do I need Codex to follow? What tools do I need to connect? And then what should the output format actually be? So that is my challenge to you. Pick the one workflow in your business that happens repeatedly, and then try and automate it end to end. If you get stuck, if you have any questions, then leave it in the comments below. And if you like this, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be making a lot more AI related content.